So hi everyone, thanks for joining us today for our first Culture Days webinar of the 2021 season. My name is Alyssa and I'm a member of the National Culture Days team. Before we begin today, I'd like to acknowledge the land that I'm speaking to you from. The Culture Days network is present and active in all corners of the country and collaborates with a vast array of peoples, organizations, and communities across First Nations, Métis, and Inuit territories. I'm speaking to you today from the treaty lands and territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit and the traditional territory of many peoples and nations, including the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Chippewa, and the Wendat peoples. Today, the City of Toronto remains the home and meeting place for many Indigenous peoples, whose presence and cultures continue to shape and influence communities. We are so grateful to be hosted on this land. Today's webinar structure is simple. It's a 45-minute presentation followed by a 10-minute Q&A period. Only the presenters' microphones will be on, so please type your questions into the Q&A box and we'll be reading out as many as we're able to. Today's session will be recorded and available with captions later if you review it or share it with your colleagues and network. Now, let me tell you a little bit more about our presenters, Community Recovery Specialist Deb Borsos and Carol Palladino, President of Arts BC. Deb and Carol are here to discuss disaster recovery viewed through the lens of arts and culture. They'll explore how the sector can contribute to shape our communities for a better post-pandemic cultural life and how important the arts and cultural sectors can be to the whole of community after disaster, COVID-based and beyond. Deb Borsos is a visual artist and for the past 16 years has worked in emergency management, specializing in emergency recovery in small, rural, and remote communities post-disaster. She has experience at the local, regional, and provincial government levels in this arena. From a lifetime as an artist and being involved in the arts at the community level, she is well aware of the value arts bring to communities in recovery. Carol Palladino has been involved in the art scene in Revelstoke, British Columbia for over 20 years. Currently the chair of Arts BC, she has experience in programming both performance series and festivals, grant writing and fundraising, as well as organizational development. She believes cultural activity in a community is necessary and that it contributes significantly to healthier and happier citizens. Turning it over now to Carol and Deb, welcome to you both.
Good morning. Thanks so much, Alyssa, for that introduction and for inviting us to speak today. I'm Deb Borsos and I live in the southeast corner of British Columbia in the beautiful West Kootenay region of the Columbia Basin. And to begin, I would like to acknowledge my gratitude to be able to live, work, and learn on the lands of the Sinixt, Ktunaxa, Syilx, Klecq'ut'ina, and Secwepemc peoples. I come from a family of 6, all who are or were artists working across a variety of disciplines. But I've also spent 30 years or so working in healthcare. So the balance of arts and emergency management doesn't seem all that unusual to me. Though I have been involved in emergency management since 2004, over the last 9 years, I've worked almost exclusively in community recovery, following landslides, debris flows, wildfires, floods, and now a pandemic. Today, Carol and I will try and give you a better picture of how the arts and cultural sector fits and is of course of great value, excuse me, when it comes to rebuilding community, whether that's after a pandemic or some other disaster, or potentially a layered effects with pandemic interspersed with other natural disasters. My perspective currently comes mostly from British Columbia, but as borders seem to me to be unneeded obstacles when it comes to being collaborative, I'm very pleased to continually have opportunities to work with colleagues from here and around the world that I share and receive information and ideas from, which in turn get passed on to communities to use in their own recovery work. I will begin by giving you a general overview of community recovery, including an example scenario of what this might involve, particularly in rural or remote communities. First slide, please. The arts and culture engage continually in community and after a disaster or a catastrophe can have numerous roles in supporting recovery. The images here from left to right, the Sing picture comes from an online globally inclusive project of connecting people and choirs and then is edited together and shared online. and the amount of time and energy and coordination by the performing arts community in particular to do things like this has been phenomenal during COVID. Interestingly, this year, this program will celebrate its 10th anniversary. No doubt it was pretty busy in 2020. The link to more about that program is going to be in the chat section. The middle image is an example of a memorial altar created locally from driftwood and flowers by residents of a small community and launched onto the lake on the first anniversary of a landslide that took 4 of their members. The last image on the right is a piece of public art that is a bell tower overlooking Halifax Harbor that memorializes the explosion and devastation of the city in December of 1917. Next slide, please. As I work mainly with rural communities, I thought I would include this slide for reference to consider. I imagine much of the rest of the country probably looks similar in terms of population distribution. Currently, the population of BC is just over 5 million. The map here shows the population as represented from 2016, so there's about 600,000 more now dispersed amongst that map. Approximately a third of the population is represented by the blue and the other 2/3 by the red and yellow. BC has 889 communities. Some are incorporated, some aren't. This number includes cities, towns, villages, districts, and First Nations communities. Each comes with its own nature and culture, and part of the challenge in recovery is helping to preserve that character while at the same time adjusting to a new normal. Regional districts, First Nations governments, and municipalities are the responsible government leads when it comes to doing recovery work in community, which doesn't mean that recovery needs to be led only by them. And often, as capacity allows, a whole of community approach when planning will produce a more cohesive outcome. Next slide, please. So if you feel safer and more comfortable looking at the picture on the left than you do on the right, this might mean you have adapted at least somewhat to the new normal. This slide also shows a very short list of examples of how things have changed due to COVID. Some for better, some for worse, loss of income for some, saving money for others, clearer skies due to less factories and vehicles running, more online presence, which can produce both good and bad effects as well. And the arts and cultural sector have, as we know, been deeply affected, but hopefully are starting to repair. Though as with other sectors, it will still be some time until life gets back to whatever normal looks like. Next slide, please. In BC, there are generally 4 pillars of recovery recognized: economic, environmental, infrastructure, and social. Though it does change slightly depending on where you are in the country. It could be 4, could be 5, could be various. These are pillars, but in almost any recovery event, they do not act alone as silos, but cross in numerous ways with each of the other pillars, depending on the scope and scale of the event. The lists noted on this slide with each pillar are generally taken from a current document from the province, the Interim Provincial Disaster Recovery Framework, which may be of interest to you if you want to learn more about recovery from a provincial standpoint. And a link will be posted to that in the chat section. This document will, I understand, be incorporated into the newly modernized Emergency Program Act for BC, probably due out for release in 2022. So following a disaster, recovery efforts begin depending on the event, capacity of the responders leading the event, and who you talk to. That could be 5 minutes in or not until several weeks later before recovery managers or a team comes on board. The sooner someone wearing a recovery hat, quote, becomes involved, the better information will be collected in order to move forward. Next slide, please. Here's a basic fictional scenario I created just to give you an idea of the general complexity of recovery and where and how the arts can fit in. It's based on a spring flooding or freshet event that was quite short in terms of time, but left behind a variety of damages. A sudden warming in the days before caused snowmelt, and after a few days of rain, the river rose rapidly, causing flooding all along the river. So here's the overview. Salmon River Township is a small rural community somewhere in BC, about 50 kilometers inland from the coast in a low-lying area. Its main industries are agriculture and more recently outdoor tourism in the form of fishing and bird watching, which are carried out mostly outside the town limits in the regional district and as part of the Salmon River's First Nations community to the west, but certainly complements the economy and culture of the town. It's a large enough community to have a well-established museum with a display of farm equipment in the park, a daycare center also in the park, various farms surrounding the town, a K-12 school, health center, and the town hall sits beside the main road that comes in from the highway about 15 kilometers to the north. To get to the town proper, you need to cross the only bridge for many kilometers in either direction. Next slide, please. So as you can see on this slide, the various dots represent where each of the pillars come into play, which is basically everywhere. And with multiple pillars for each type of damage in different orders from top to bottom, according to the importance. And noticeably in almost every case, the social pillar is included, which is also the pillar where the arts generally reside. Here's a list of some of the physical damages and effects that could have occurred in this scenario. Once the water reached the farming area to the east of town, the following could have happened. It washed away the water system for the agricultural areas, deposited gravel and debris on the hayfield and pastures, left the farmers with no watering system for their livestock, ate away at and absorbed land on both sides of the river, which was then washed downstream. The salmon spawning area was washed out. The bridge abutments on both sides of the river were damaged, so the bridge had to be closed. The museum was fine, but the historic farm equipment on display was pushed over and destroyed by the debris coming down the river. More gravel and mud were left on the park shore. A long stretch of land across the river, which was full of nesting areas for the birds, was washed away. A boardwalk was inundated across the river through the marshland. The land in front of the daycare was washed out, leaving the building unstable and unusable, and the town water system was damaged, so it had to be shut down. So these are just a few of the nuts and bolts of what could have happened physically in this example. It all took place in approximately 6 hours on a weekend. No evacuations were needed. No one was physically harmed, but all of the pillars of recovery became involved for a variety of things, as reflected in this slide. And shortly, we'll show you some of the ways the cultural sector could be involved in the recovery from an event like this. This could also mean working with different groups, agencies, ministries, the town, the First Nation, the regional district, and or the province. It is usually an all-inclusive process, and the arts can be and are a key component to helping ameliorate things. Next slide, please. This slide is my plug for and wholehearted wish that particularly smaller communities and nonprofit groups and small businesses do some pre-planning for recovery if you haven't already. This means that included in the overarching emergency plan for your community when a disaster happens, that is how to protect your home or your community before the wildfire, for example, reaches the community. You're also planning as part of that a more in-depth discussion and considerations ahead of time for what happens when the fire is out and you have to go home, which depending on the event might be minimal or might take some time and effort to carry out. Awareness and planning ahead of time will give a much higher chance for better recovery in the whole community. So if you can have a voice in rebuilding your community, would you want the outcome to be something like this top photo on the right? Or maybe through various discussions of needs and desires and foresight across the community, it might look more like, there, thank you. Might look more like this photo from Pachuca, Mexico, where they obviously have smart city planners. This wasn't after a disaster. The government sponsored a 65,000 square foot mural to support community renewal, but of course, this type of thing could equally be considered as a project in recovery. These photos, of course, reflect extreme examples at either end, but you get the picture. Here is a link being loaded, I believe, to an article about Pachuca and what they did when they developed that mural. Recovery planning is very similar to community planning when looked at initially, but also with a lens of what is needed to recover, to replace, to build back better in as whole a fashion as possible. Not just the buildings or the businesses, but that at times hard to define culture and identity of a community. What is available to use as a plan B for buildings, transport, other land, for the look of the town, where could new structures or facilities or gathering places be built? If not exactly the same, because it will be changed in some ways, at least recognizable to those who live there when moving from past to future. Interestingly, that comment in the top left corner of the slide is from a government manual on the positives of pre-planning for recovery, but it seems like they left a few things out, and with more of a focus on the arts, other socially focused items could have been part of these comments as well. And I've included a few more below that you can consider: public gathering areas, galleries, public art, cohesive color schemes, etc. And in these times, the enormous prospect of rebuilding that addresses climate change will of course be part of the process as well. So moving forward, COVID in terms of the arts and cultural sector is a bit of a different type of disaster and recovery, with the primary thing that is lacking due to COVID restrictions being that human connection. And the arts have pivoted in amazing ways to accommodate that. Personally, I think the arts and cultural sector should be raised up in more broadly a way to promote the value and expanse of what this can bring to community recovery, whether in supporting a pandemic or any other type of recovery. The amount of social capital within a community will help to make or break its recovery and longevity. Here's a link to the website of a preeminent master in researching this topic, Professor Daniel Aldrich, who's written 5 books and collected many research statistics from around the world proving the value of it that may be of interest. And if anyone is interested in approaches to beginning pre-planning as a nonprofit or community, anywhere from just a discussion about it or doing more in-depth planning, I'm happy to discuss different ways of going about that. Recognizing that local community is the legal authority responsible in community recovery, the more inclusive a process that is carried out ahead of time, the more successful the recovery will be when everyone returns after an event and wonders where to begin. And now I will step off my pre-planning soapbox and Carol will carry on with further comments.
Thanks, Deb. Hi, everyone. My name is Carol Palladino, and I am the current president of Arts BC, a province-wide arts service organization, as well as the chair of West Kootenay Regional Arts Council and my local arts council, Arts Revelstoke. We're located on the beautiful Columbia River between the Selkirk and Monashee mountain ranges, the traditional territories of the Ktunaxa, the Sinixt, the Syilx, and the Secwepemc peoples. Next slide, please. This slide outlines some ideas for community projects that would be led by the cultural sector. The scenario, in the scenario that Deb has outlined, the Bridge project in particular speaks to the possibilities around reusing and recycling items, and you'll see more on that idea later. Next slide, please, and back to Deb for a second. You're muted.
Deb, sorry, do you mind unmuting your mic?
Well, that would help.
you.
I'm sorry. Let me try that again. Blah, blah, blah. Sorry. Many things are similar in rural and urban recovery, but much comes down to the capacity of the community to respond. Currently, it's also according to tax base and resources that tax funding provides, but it doesn't always have to be about money. There are various ways of looking at the rural versus urban discussion. An example would be a 70-person apartment building, maybe a lot more work to support and keep the residents safe in longer-term recovery than, say, 70 homes in a remote community, depending on the event, of course. We know that rural residents are already pretty independent and resilient, but with the case that I just spoke about, if in an urban setting you don't have storage space for extra food and water, can't stay warm because the entire grid went down and your electric heat is off, don't have a vehicle because you always take public transit, then it could be far more complex than the same scenario presented in a rural context, which may involve 70 homes on 70 properties, which could offer more space for storage, ways to keep warm, a vehicle. You may know your neighbors more than you do in an apartment building. Again, it depends on the scope and scale of the event and community, of course. Now back to Carol, and turn your mic on, Carol.
Thanks, Deb. So historically, the arts have been used as a catalyst in post-war economies to reinvigorate spending in the local economy and facilitate social cohesion. The cultural sector has the potential to support recovery through all 4 pillars that Deb outlined. And over the last year, our sector has delivered innovative and engaging programming that has supported our community members through their isolation, their grief, their anxiety. As we pivoted to new ways to deliver our stories and our work, we were discovered by new audiences, some who had found our programming inaccessible previously. We entertained and engaged in newly found virtual space. We sang in choirs, we took art lessons, we made dance and music. All of this accomplished against a backdrop of closed venues, staff programming, and revenue cuts. The cultural sector in this country is creative and collaborative, and the potential for unlikely partnerships is high as we begin the process to reinvent our post-pandemic communities. We've been leading the trend for outdoor arts and creative placemaking. And we're also leading the national conversation around systems change in regard to equity, diversity, and inclusion. Our skills base is broad and professional and will be an exciting addition to the recovery conversation in our communities. But as we move forward, we should be mindful of our resources and recognize that not only are we participating in recovery, but that our workers and organizations are recovering as well. Take the time to emerge from this crazy state that we've been in with plans that are scalable and responsive to the remaining anxiety that our audiences may be feeling. Our communication strategies are going to be very important as things begin to open up. COVID has highlighted the need for a cohesive operational language when speaking about the cultural sector, especially its impacts, and the need for building on this mobilization as a sector and further organizing, similar to what tourism did about 25 years ago. We also need to get really good at evaluation and measurement. Our challenge is to collaborate and speak with one voice, not only to maintain, but to increase the level of cultural literacy among policy and decision makers. The lack of understanding of our sector was evident within public health orders. We need to help decision makers understand how deeply what we do matters to the people in our communities and how profoundly the arts affects our quality of life, whether urban or rural. Going forward, Culture Days can perhaps help catalyze the return of audiences by collaborating with local governments in incentivizing household participation in the arts, possibly providing something like free household culture passes, just a wish, or at the very least, helping to encourage audiences return to art spaces. The next slide, please. So speaking of rural resiliency, I'm going to share a couple of examples of outdoor arts and cultural placemaking, our very own Arts Revelstoke experience. The Art Alleries project is public art located in our downtown core alleys. Phase 1 was successfully launched in 2019, and Phase 2 was supposed to launch during our 2020 Luna Festival at the end of September. In a Luna Festival reimagined in 2020, we were able to offer some exciting new work in a safe, socially distanced way. One of the sites launched in 2020 was work by Bruno Long, which is in this slide, a local photographer who proposed the Friend of a Friend installation. Over the summer of 2020, Bruno began with photographing a friend, but from there, as people recommended the next in line, he took photos of individuals who were linked through knowing each other, but unknown to him. The process and each photo with his comments was shared through social media and became a real community connecting project through the COVID experience. Next slide, please. These are some of the final examples of the 3 pieces of art mounted in the downtown alley. The 3 on the left side, one is, we're a railroad town, so one is stained glass, and it's a locomotive, which is mounted actually in the windows of our local credit union. The slide on the extreme right, which is a metal sculpture, is actually on the back of, in the back alley behind what is our local Roxy Theater. And next, I've got a short video about local artist Rob Buchanan, whose amazing idea Art Alleries was. Please roll the video.
My name is Rob Buchanan, and I'm an artist in Revelstoke, British Columbia. The Art Alleries concept is to transform this space into an outdoor art gallery. So Revelstoke is a ski town, and how can I use a product of our ski town, reinterpret it in a new way, and that's where assemblage art and recycling skis comes in. You know, over time, people have given me all sorts of old skis that they just can't bear to throw out. And I'm thinking, Mona Lisa, skis, Mona Lisa, skis, Mona Skisa. Oh, I'll make the Mona Lisa out of skis. And then I think too, like, well, why stop there? Why not make more pop style art out of recycled skis? Why not start to take inspiration from Andy Warhol and some of the stuff that he did? with icons like Mick Jagger and Marilyn Monroe? Why not recreate Vermeer's The Girl with the Pearl Earring? Why not start this like recycling renaissance where it's a renaissance of recycling, but it's also recycling renaissance pieces too? To me, it's just magical that this space that was never used in this way has been transformed into a new safe space for people to interact with art and have an amazing experience and discover another layer of Revelstoke.
The next slide, please. Yes. So this is the Guerrilla Gig story. Arts Revelstoke has hosted a Summer Street Festival for the past 25 years or so. We present live performers in our downtown Grizzly Plaza every night from the end of June to the beginning of September for free for an audience of local residents and visitors. In the summer of 2020, the public health orders for smaller audience numbers of 50 challenged our artistic executive director, Miriam Manley, to come up with an alternative. Her amazing solution, hosting weekly live performances in several secret outdoor settings called Guerrilla Gigs. Next slide, please. Tickets became available at a specific time online. We're limited to between 25 to 30 per show, and the ticket holders were asked not to share the location to avoid the possibility of being over the allowed numbers. The online ticket sales provided the ability to contact trace. We provided masks and hand sanitizer and checked people off at the gate. And as you can see, people brought their own chairs and they were able to keep at least a minimum of 6 feet between them, and lots of times much more space than that. Next slide, please. Each event was filmed and edited to share online through our social media. This was great for community morale and also increased our profile with the performing artists and non-residents. And before I hand things back to Deb, I'd like to share the following short video. This is Juno Award-winning Indigenous artist Kaylee Cardinal on the grounds of the Revelstoke Railway Museum on a hot August 2020 afternoon. And it was so much fun.
Well, I got some habits that I ain't quit. And I got some awful, dirty, nasty, evil tricks. Well, I got piles of trash and I got layers and layers of scars. I got a lot of junk to get through to get to this jaded old heart. But you blew in like a warm breeze in the spring. You shake off the dust, you bring agree back to everything. And I fight with myself more than I will ever fight with you. The love that you give makes me feel like there is nothing I can do. And there ain't no way I'm gonna let you go, baby. There ain't no way I'm gonna let this slip away. There ain't no way I'm gonna let you go, baby. There ain't no way I'm gonna let this slip away. So there are places, real dark places that I hide. And I got poison, oh, so many poisons to ease my mind. And I'll drift away even when you're holding me tight. Oh, I got a lot of repairing left to do to make everything all let you go, baby. There ain't no way I'm gonna let this slip away. There ain't no way I'm gonna let you go, baby. There ain't no way I'm gonna let this slip away. There ain't no way I'm gonna let you go, baby. There ain't no way I'm gonna let this slip away.
That was great. Thanks, Carol. This list here is just examples. It's just a small sampling of funding and resources, some from BC, some federally and internationally, just to give you ideas of where to reach out for funding and types of projects already completed in communities post-disaster. Three of these are links to lists of more links. And there's an interesting link to a group in Australia whose main purpose is to support creative projects in recovery. That may be of interest to you. It's a really interesting site. I highly suggest looking at it. And those links will be put in the chat section for you, as well as this is being recorded, so you can go back and check this out later. It will depend on the disaster and the needs as to which sector or funder or which paths you need to explore. But think laterally when you're thinking of funding, because there may be funders who wouldn't normally fund something that is artistically or creatively considered, but in recovery, they might do it. And with creative minds and some empathy and those who are adept at thinking outside the box, the job is easier.
And so I think we're on to some questions. Alyssa, have we got some questions in the Q&A?
Yes, we do. Thank you so much, Deb and Carol, just for sharing your time and expertise. We do have a few questions from participants. The first one we have here says, I appreciate applying models of natural disaster recovery to the arts and culture sector, since many municipalities have authority over many listed examples referenced by Deb, for example, public spaces, public art, and access to parks. How do you think community organizers and artists could effectively approach municipalities supporting this lens?
Okay. I think the, well, I'm a pragmatist, and I would find out who the local government was, and I would go have a discussion with them directly and say, we have a group, we have these skills, abilities, this is our capacity, this isn't our capacity. We would like to talk with you about doing a whole of community approach. And how do we go about that? How do you see it happening? Let's talk about it. Because you just start at the grassroots and go up. That's going to be the most effective. But start with local government, who are the ones that are legally responsible. In BC, and I believe in other provinces as well, that is the way it goes.
And I would just add the comment is, as we're learning through so many other processes we're doing these days, it's about relationships. And quite often, the relationship we have with our local governments is one of, we like their support for funding, but we don't report back to them. We don't keep them in the conversation. And I know even in my community, we're guilty of this. You know, you get head down and you're busy doing your work, and but you're not actually looping back. And so I think that whole thing about building relationships, both with administrative staff as well as your counselors, those sorts of people, giving them information, giving them reports when you're not asking for funds. Although I always think an ask makes sure that somebody has a look at it as opposed to passing it over, but that's just me. But again, going back to several processes that are ongoing currently in this country, it is really about the relationship. So working on that.
And one more thing I might add is that if you are a nonprofit group in a smaller community, you will blow the minds of your local government if you go to them and say, hey, we have a pre-event recovery plan already figured out, and we'd like to put it into the appendices of the emergency plan that we know you have, so that you know what we're doing and what we can do and make it easier to connect when we need to. That's one of my wishes too.
No, that's fantastic. And just kind of jumping off of the relationship building, someone had asked, could you speak more to the unique cross-sectoral partnerships that you mentioned could come out of creative community recovery? How do you suggest connecting with those outside of arts and culture and bring them in to be a part of the project and the recovery process?
I think we need to pay attention to what's going on, and again, we get siloed in our sectors, and I kind of don't want to put it all on our sector to have to do the reaching out, but that may in fact need to be the case. You know, I'm not sure who the audience is here, but you know, anybody in the municipal sector, if they can sort of take a look at who's out there, who are the players in their community, and have you invited them to the table to talk about what's going on? Are they represented in at your recovery table, for instance? You know, again, it's I think we have to work at it from both sides. And again, as Deb mentioned right at the beginning of this, this sector, the cultural sector, has been hit really hard. And some of us have been able to pivot really well. Some of us have been well funded through our government processes. The BC Arts Council in particular has been incredibly supportive with resiliency funds, keeping many organizations alive. A lot of the ones who require sort of ticket revenue, those have been impacted significantly. And so, you know, this whole startup and excitement, it's like culture can't be the afterthought. We need to be in the conversation earlier. And so again, it's that idea of unlikely partnerships, and who better than creatives to kind of think of those. So it's not just even the culture sector, but who are the creatives at your table? You know, whether they're artists, whether they're in nonprofit organizations, just, I guess, from both sides of the coin, we need to go, are we at the table, or who's at the table, and really try and work to make sure that we're talking to each other.
And if that nasty word capacity, which it usually does, comes into play, one softer way of going about connecting through the sectors, if your local government is just up to its eyeballs in work and can't do anything, look for a community association or an umbrella organization that could perhaps you could talk to and say, hey, could you bring all the various players together and we'll have a discussion about this, and invite the local government and invite the other players in it. But someone that has the capacity to coordinate across, as Carol was saying, across the sectors, to get everybody together, just start in a conversation. That's where you need to go.
Fantastic. And we have one other question, and maybe Deb, this might be just pointing out a resource that you had in your list, but someone had said that they work with young children and their goal is to help them express themselves and their emotions through art. And the pandemic has certainly transformed their lives significantly, especially little ones. So just curious for smaller businesses, if there are spaces or locations to look out there for funding and for support for those smaller groups. And because we did talk a lot about rural recovery, where they can go for funding and a little bit of help.
I would have to sit down for an hour or two and do some research. But I'm happy to connect with the person asking. And if I can get a little more around that, I could probably give them some ideas. Sure, happy to.
Fantastic. Yeah. And once again, we have shared all of the links in the chat, and we will provide probably a PDF once the webinar recording goes up on our website with the links that Deb and Carol shared today, just so they're all accessible in one place.
Alyssa, I just would like to comment, just to follow up on Deb's comments.
Sure.
We Community Futures is something that is a business development, mostly in non-urban space across the entire country. And I know that here in Revelstoke, the Community Futures organization is offering loads of support to small business to help them kind of come up with new options in terms of what they need to pivot, those kinds of things. So at the very least, that is I know that that's a cross Canadian resource for small businesses. And I would expect every Community Futures organization in the country has some programs or is aware of programs that would support small business.
Fantastic. Thank you. There we go. I'm just checking. It looks like those might be all of our questions from the Q&A, unless anybody has a last minute question. Then what I might do is just thank you, Deb and Carol, again for joining us today. It's such a great opportunity to learn more, especially best practices and what we can do looking forward for creative community recovery. To everyone who joined us today, thank you. As I mentioned, a recording of this webinar will be available on the Culture Days website shortly with captions as well. We'll let you know with a follow-up message when it's up and ready for viewing. And don't forget, the best way to stay in the loop about Culture Days news, future webinars, and other updates and opportunities is through our newsletter, which you can sign up for at culturedays.ca/newsletter. Thank you again for joining us. Carol and Deb, did you have any final notes to leave us with today?
I just wanted to make one point on the last slide. There is a link to the Second Responders website, which is a website I built a couple of years ago because I had so many different links and resources and things, and they were all over the place. So I put them on the website, and anyone is welcome to use them. There's various pages you can explore for funding or resources or opportunities or great reads or good ideas. And that's what it's there for. It's for community recovery, and the arts is represented within there. But thank you, Elisa.
No problem. Thanks for joining us today.
It's been a pleasure. I as well, Arts BC, follow us on Facebook, check out we're updating our webpage, so it's going to be newer and better sometime soon, but following us on Facebook, we do roundtables, that sort of thing, and keep sort of the sector in British Columbia up to date on funding opportunities, knowledge sharing and learning opportunities. So anybody across the country can actually check it out though, and that's at Arts BC.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again, Carol and Deb, for joining us today, and thanks everyone for joining. Take care and be well.